Okay, so welcome to the Detective Lounge. It is August 27th, Thursday, August 27th. Sorry for the delay, but Substack, if you don't get on there right away, it actually pushes you out about 30 minutes. So if you miss a time window to schedule a future live stream, it says, no, you can't do it right away. You can't set a live stream, schedule it for 10 minutes later. So apologies for that. But we do have a special guest today. Will be Michael Yon. He'll be coming on here shortly, and then we're going to be talking about a lot of issues. So the couple things that we're going to be hitting on is, we were just talking before we went live, there's a lot within the history of the formation of our current paradigm that we have. And let me go ahead and bring him on here. Actually, let me go ahead and do that. Michael, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I've got you.
Hey, there we go. And he's wearing his combat poncho right there. So that is the tactical poncho, which is pretty cool.
This is it.
I missed that. You used to have that in the interviews, like from COVID forward, and then all of a sudden you started getting all fancy on us, like jackets, and I'm like, I don't know who this person is. I don't know. I was frightened.
That's the long-haired general behind the long-haired general behind the scenes. Masako behind the scenes.
Michael, I was like, blink twice if you need us to rescue you. He's wearing a sport coat. Blink twice.
Michael, stop wearing the poncho.
But luckily, this is a detective lounge, so we're lounging here. It's just casual conversation, totally informal. Where we're going to talk about things in history. We're going to talk about some tradecraft tips about how you can use investigatory techniques for researching history, and then pretty much just open dialogue like we do. We get together, we just talk, but we're letting all the other people in on our conversations that we normally have, behind the scenes. So it's kind of nice. I like it. I like the informal aspect of it. And then I did want to mention a big shout out to you for hooked me up with Christian White, who has a podcast. You were on his podcast, and then he asked me to be on his. I guess you referred me, so thank you. So I'll go on there and try to figure out something to say tomorrow. But yeah, he's got a pretty neat podcast. So I kind of looked at it and I liked it. So. Don't know why he asked me, but okay, I'll go in there and give it my best shot for trying to present, how history.
We were talking about something, and I was like, "Oh, you need to get Al on for that." Yeah, yeah.
Well, you did, so thank you. So I'll be on Christian White. We'll record tomorrow, but I don't know when they'll air it. So we'll talk more history and how history, a correct interpretation of history, gives you a better working model to understand kind of what's going on today. And then, as everybody knows, especially the last few years and actually a couple of weeks, your working model of understanding history and that pattern analysis, and then, okay, let's project it forward, has been on target far more than, a lot of these think tanks and public groups that they got running around the Beltway there. Pretty impressive. In fact, I think, 48 or 72 hours or 48 hours ago, you were actually talking about cascading dams and, water is a weapon and cascading dams and infrastructure. And then, I don't know, it was like a day after, and suddenly we're getting all these alerts from Nepal, and in China they had the glacier collapse, and then they didn't notify downstream, so this wall of mud has just pretty much wiped out a number of looks like towns and villages on that river going down from that. Basically, it's like a tsunami along a river, but you had just talked about that because you understood the patterns of history and you'd actually walked that terrain, so that was pretty impressive. So again, anybody that's not following you, definitely recommend follow Michael Yon, because he's taking this pattern of history that we talk about here, but he projects it forward and says, okay, this is what might happen based on this pattern, and he's got a good working model, unlike most people. So pretty good on that one.
Anything you want to say about that just for a minute?
That's your old stomping ground.
Yeah, can we talk about that just for a minute?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I spent about a year in Nepal, and a lot of that time was out walking in the Himalaya mountains, and yeah, it was about 24 hours before that just happened that I actually put on my Substack a video talking about cascades like that, right? And it's quite fascinating because glacier warfare is definitely a thing of the future. It's already happened, but it's very illegal. Now, and then glaciers, basically, what is a glacier? A glacier is basically a frozen river, right? A glacier is basically snowpack that doesn't melt, and over thousands of years or however long it takes, it gets to be a huge chunk of ice. And for those who've been around glaciers, like I've been up like those glaciers at Mount Everest and all that, those things are alive They are incredible. They are power. They are absolutely powerful. Now, glaciers can cause GLOFs, which is glacier lake outbreak flood. It's called a GLOF, glacier lake outbreak flood. Those are illegal to do in warfare. I see people talking about the ones that just happened, saying that the that it's global warming, and I'm like, you're not even in the game. You know what I mean? Glacier lake outbreaks have happened for a long time. For instance, there was a huge one in 1929 that happened in this sort of same area, but it went down the Indus River. As you know, the Indus River is one of the most important rivers on earth. India is named after the Indus River, right? Hindu is named after the Indus River. It's like the Indus River is very important, right? To put it mildly. The biggest, irrigation system in the world today is on the Indus River. There's like 5,000 years of civilization there. There was a glacier outbreak there in 1929, and that bad boy, more than 700 miles downriver, it was still like 28 feet high. The flood. Yeah, it hit
Wow.
Atok, a place called Atok. It took 17 hours, man. And then there was some in the 1800s. And you know what I'm saying? There's nothing new about glacier lake outbreak floods. Now, this is important about what just happened. I've taken that road from Kathmandu over to Lhasa, which is the capital of Tibet, right? So capital of Nepal is Kathmandu. So I went capital to capital. I drove. It was a long drive, man. And some of the people in the van, they got altitude sickness. One of them fainted in front of me and hit his head on the bumper. It's terrible. But I mean, this is severe terrain, right? So anything that you've ever seen in the Rockies, the most severe terrain you've ever seen in the Rockies, at least double that minimum, right? What's the highest mountain in the continental United States? Maybe 14,000 feet or something, right? Is it something like that? And
Well,
anything
maybe.
in Nepal, anything less than 20,000 feet, they call it a hill. And I'm serious. I'm dead serious. If it's less than 20,000 feet, it's a hill, right? I mean, you can trek up to about 20,000 feet, right? And so anything less than that, they can. Why is this wire's hanging out? Sorry, it's my so it doesn't have the echo. So in any case, the what I'm getting to is there's a lot of severe stuff happens up there, and it happens on the Himalayan scale, right? Which is not like any scale you see in North America or South America. It's a special scale. And so when you have these glaciers do their thing, the sky's the limit. Now, interestingly, I've taken that road where that just happened, where that glacier lake outbreak flood just happened. It went right through that border crossing. The Nepalese call that Kirong. The Chinese call it like Girong. It has a slightly different name. Actually, there's several names for it, but the Nepalese call it Kirong, Kerung. That is a major trade route on the BRI between China and Nepal. So it just took that out. Now, interestingly, in the 2015 earthquake, there was another crossing. I think that was the crossing I took when I went to Lhasa, actually. That one got wiped out in the 2015 earthquake. So then this one became like 1/3 of the trade between China. A lot of it's food, a huge amount's food between China and Nepal goes over what was just destroyed by that glacial lake outburst flood, right? Now, I have no reason to believe. So now it's closed, I mean, indefinitely. And they were going to build a train that goes from China through Tibet. And I've been watching that for years. I'm like, when are they going to build the train? Because I want to go on it, right? And they were going to build a train. And actually, the Nepalese are upset because it looks like China got them in a debt trap. You can look at the old newspaper articles. Same people going, Nepal will successfully not get into a debt trap because they're smarter than everybody else in the world, and they get in a debt trap. And so, and then China doesn't build the train on time. But anyway, that train would come down through China, through Lhasa, through Tibet, and then through Kathmandu, and go down to Lumbini, which is on the Indian border. That's where Buddha was born and that sort of thing, right? So anyway, and then to India. Now that would allow eventually hook up with India and that would be another sort of not like an artery, but a capillary between China and the sea eventually, right? It wouldn't be, but so what just happened was another capillary got taken out, not an artery. It's important. It's important for Nepal, and it's important for Tibet region. It's not, on the scale of the world, it's a capillary, but it's an additive pressure. Now there's a high chance, a very high chance that was nothing but Mother Nature doing Mother Nature stuff at Himalayan scale. However, the ability to cause glacial lake outbreak floods is just a fact of war. You can do it, right? And they will often cascade. Look at that 1929 flood that went from the glacier, boom, 700 miles away, took out a lot of that town. Anyway, I'm just saying, I don't know what the deal was with that location and all that. Maybe it was nothing, but it is something to keep in the back of your mind. Especially, it was interesting that it happened just like 24 hours after I was talking about cascading floods like that being, the ability to do it in a man-made way. Just a coincidence, though.
I'm sure somebody will blame you for it. It's like he knew.
Probably.
What did he know and when did he know it? But I know the chatter in some of the Nepal nets that were translating anyway on X, they're talking about that there in 2017 a memorandum of understanding was set up between the CCP and Nepal about the warning system, and then that didn't happen this time. Right, there's supposed to be a warning if anything happened upstream, and that lake apparently where the glacier was is in CCP occupied territory, and there's no warning. Right, so in other words, that warning system that they were supposed to do completely failed. Like China didn't call Nepal. They're like, yeah, don't worry about them. So
That's
there's a little bit
Can
of
I say
anger in
something
there.
on that? That's super
Yeah.
interesting. That's super interesting. Just like the warning that was, with the huge earthquake and the tsunami in Thailand and the lack of warning and confusion and all that. Now, let's go back to 1929. I haven't seen anybody talk about this. This is just stuff that, I just looked up over time. But in 1929, that glacial lake outbreak flood, it took out that place 700 miles away, right? But it didn't kill anybody there. Maybe two or something. I don't remember. It was nothing big. It killed people upstream. But the thing is why not? Because they had a warning system, telegraph cable. They were good for it. That was 1929. I can't hear you.
Wow.
There you go.
1929 they did that.
1929 they had a warning system. But not in 2026 with Starlinks all over the place.
What was difference? Oh, the CCP was in charge. Okay, now we see. Interesting, man. And same area, was that 1929? Was that basically that same area, the Nepal, Tibet?
That one's more to the west because that went down the Indus River, and the one that you just saw was like just north of Kathmandu, actually. So, actually, Nepal is kind of a elongated country, and it goes mostly east to west. Obviously, as north to south as well. But actually, Nepal is a very complex country. All of the latitudes of Nepal fit within the latitudes of Florida. The southernmost latitude of Nepal is about Fort Lauderdale. The northernmost is the Florida-Georgia line, but sits within Florida. So no latitudes of Nepal are higher than Florida border, right? Now, Mount Everest, the peak of Mount Everest, which is it's on the Tibetan border, is the peak of Mount Everest. Literally 10-digit coordinates would be my grandparents' house that I grew up in Winter Haven, Florida. It's actually the same latitude as the international airport. I think Terminal 3 at Tampa International Airport.
So the elevation makes that climate different, so much different. That's crazy.
You'll see down in the southern part of Nepal, which is called the Terai region, when the British were like, we're going to go through here, and the mosquitoes were like, how about no? Mosquitoes were wiping them out, man. And there was all kinds of, they got tigers down there. They got all bears that kill people, like those Japanese bears that murder people all the time. They got them there too. And those bears are crazy, and they got all kinds of critters down there that just kill people. And eventually the British were like, "Can we just hire these Nepalese people?" So they did. That's where the Gurkhas came from. So but as you go through that flatland area, the Terai, it's very flat and hot. It's like Florida with no electricity, sort of. And I've been through there. It's not a friendly area. And then you get up into I've walked all the way to the base camp of Mount Everest twice. And as you go through all these ecosystems that you'll be familiar with. You'll go, I'm like, this is like Florida, like Poker reminds me of Florida. You go through, you go through different latitudes. You're like, oh, this is like Colorado. This is like, and finally you get to a point like, okay, this is new territory. I've never seen something like this before. This is way beyond the tree line. But one of the things that's interesting is like one area that I trekked several times called the Torong La Pass. Torong La means pass. La. If you see La on the end of a word in Hindi or Nepalese, La means pass. So Torong La is a pass where it goes. It's about 18,000 feet. That's where I've showed you the picture of that horse that I had with my books on the back. The horse.
Yeah.
With the pelican case with the gators.
The pelican cases. Yeah.
Yeah, that's my books in there, and I had hired that horse to take my books over the Torong La Pass, right? But that pass, there was a bunch of tourists up there in 2015 or so, or 16. Anyway, they were going over, and a big, maybe it was 14, a big storm came up from the Bay of Bengal, and people didn't get warned. And although they had every reason in the world to get warned, so it was a cyclone that came up over through Bangladesh, up those mountains, and killed about 40 or 50 of them, right at that pass where that horse is, right? So what I'm getting to is everything that happens out there. There was one cop, he might have been Scottish or Irish, English maybe, I think it was Scottish. But anyway, the cop, for whatever reason, the cop had spidey senses. He's like, don't do it. Don't do it. And he persuaded a lot of people not to go over Torong La that day, and they all survived. The other one's dead or gone forever. Yeah, but the point is there was no warning there either. But again, I don't know what happened, if that was man-made or not. But I'm telling you, glacial warfare will be a thing of the future, and it's important to study rivers, and it's important to study dams, and it's important to study glaciers. Glaciers will be a thing of the future, especially like as China takes more control over Tibet and builds. China can do such forms of hydraulic warfare. Now, when you're studying what we're going to talk about today, you know, with the 7 pillars, I mean, that's all about routes and resources, right? And the other, like the Tigris River and that sort of thing. Sooner or later, that Mosul Dam, that thing's going to pop. And then it's going to take every dam. I first wrote about that in roughly 2006, Mosul Dam. And sooner or later, that bad boy, when these glaciers go or when the dams go, they can cascade and take out all the dams downriver like dominoes. And that's what happens. So you end up with these massive, like super tsunamis inland. That's why, you know, if you live near, Misako and I are looking for places for Kanjiro House now, and the first thing I look at is like, I'm not looking in any of these zones. Anything that has the potential of, you know, massive amount of water coming down some ravine because some people have dams up there, ain't no way I'm building below a dam, especially not 3 or 4 dams. You know what I mean?
Smart. Smart.
Yeah.
No, that's true. And then there's another person that you're friends with, Moira Monahan. She writes about, you know, how from Tibet those rivers go down, and China can, you know, they have that dam warfare, right? They can use that, you know, through there, and even down on the Mekong, right? Because the Mekong literally is the lifeblood of, you know, about 7 nations there in Southeast Asia. It goes through, and if those rivers change course, or, you know, any warfare along that, the hydraulic warfare, as you said, that has a tremendous impact, a huge impact. And so
that's how they're going to take out Egypt, man. That's how they're
it's interesting. So, yeah,
they'll take out Egypt with those dams.
Yep. In fact, the guys we were talking about in T.E. Lawrence and the Lord Curzon and the others that were talking about that for the British in World War I, they mentioned that, for example, Iraq and Egypt are both nations that depend on the river, right? So in other words, you know, with Iraq, it's the Tigris and Euphrates, but mostly the Tigris. And then in Egypt, it's the Nile, right? Without the river, there's no nation, right? There's nothing. And so that's literally the heart of it. So the Aswan Dam, like you said, in Egypt, and Mosul Dam up over in Iraq, and they're on, you know, pretty much a razor's edge. If that goes out, you know, that's a civilizational collapse almost for their entire nation. It's pretty tough.
And Ataturk Dam too. Ataturk Dam up in Turkey on the Euphrates. and that's a cascading dam network too. Ataturk's huge, and if they take out Ataturk, now Saddam Hussein threatened to blow up Ataturk, when he was,
Hmm.
but if you end up with a fight with Israel versus Turkey, they're probably going to go for that cascade that includes Ataturk Dam, which would flood Euphrates, and I'm guessing they'll take out Mosul Dam and that cascade, right? So then that'll be devastating for Iraq, taking out both of those cascade networks. And then you look over in Egypt, the Gerd Dam, the Greater Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which was all these information wars, is that all the children and everything, they say the children and
Save their
everybody were
pennies
investing in
and
bonds.
bonds or
Oh
stocks.
yeah,
It's like,
like 60% of the country doesn't even have electricity. They don't know what a bond is other than bondage, And but what that's really about, and now they want to build 3 more dams. So when you look at hydraulic warfare, like let's go back to Fallujah Dam in 2016 or so, when ISIS had it. So what they did, what ISIS did, you can do hydraulic warfare both directions. You can flood people upriver by filling it up. So that what they did was ISIS flooded people upstream from the river, and
mm,
then which dried the people up downstream. You're doing both at the same time, and then they flooded them downstream, right? So you can do
mm,
that with if you have those 4 dams in Ethiopia. Let's say it's 10 years from now, and they got 4 dams going, right? Now you got 4 big reservoirs in Ethiopia, upriver, uphill from Egypt and Sudan, right? So now you got 4
mm,
reservoirs, and you just wait until there's a nice big already flood stage at Aswan, release those reservoirs up there. Those 4 in Ethiopia, just release them. Don't blow them up, just release them and blow up Aswan Dam. You're going to kill Egypt. And then you can cut those 4, you can then refill those 4 reservoirs and make years of drought in Egypt. So you can just
mm.
do a devastating flood in Egypt. I mean, a kinetic flood, not one of those, hey, the water's slowly rising, but no, it's like that flood that we just saw, right? Except a lot bigger. Because, the Blue Nile, which is where those 4 dams are, and because the Nile that we're talking about has 2 rivers, the White Nile and the Blue Nile, right? So 85% of the Nile that we think of, the one that goes to Egypt, 85% of that water comes from the Blue Nile, and that's where the Gerd Dam is, and the other 3 that they want to build. Now, that will help Israel take New Somalia, right? And so that is all part of that. When you look at, anyway, in the larger local, anyway, the dams and the glaciers and all this stuff, these are going to be a thing of big time future warfare, because nobody gives any 2 hoots about war crimes anymore. They're way beyond all that stuff.
That's it's sad but true. It's kind of the big differentiator between 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and now is, like you said, they've not nobody's focused on it whatsoever anymore. It's kind of interesting. So yeah, and like I said, if anybody's out there, you can go over to I don't have Moira Monahan's site, but she wrote a couple of books on it. And she's got a couple articles on the 7, what is it, the 7 rivers that come out of Tibet that basically feed into Asia, right? So India and Asia. So that's why Tibet is so important. In one way, it's strategic because that's the mother river, the mother source for Southeast Asia, India. The huge broad stroke of area, Nepal, Tibet. All of that comes through from basically one source that feeds into most of Asia, huge population regions. And then if China controls it and can do that cascade warfare going down, then that creates a massive threat vulnerability in the regional, right? So you're talking all, India, Southeast Asia, Thailand, Malaysia, Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos. So I mean, it's a huge problem. So,
That's
but most, like I
part of
said, most
why
people don't even think about it.
my cult books are called, and have been called, the working title, Mother River. Because that in India they call the Ganges Gangama, Mother River, Mother Ganges, right? And look in Thailand, you've been to Chiang Mai, they call it Mae Nam Ping. Mae Nam is Nam Ping is the name of the river, Nam Ping, and Mae Nam Ping,
May is
Mother
mom.
River Ping, right? Mae Nam. A lot of people call it, because those rivers in a place like Egypt, the river is actually sort of a prison for the population as well, because it's a particular sort of river system, like in Iraq is similar. So around it's very hostile. You can't really grow anything, and it's very big.
Mm.
You know what I mean? So the population is kind of like 95% of the fresh water in Egypt comes from the Nile River, and about 95% of the population lives along that river. So if you take out that river, you won't really take the river out, but you can change it so much that it will dramatically decrease the population. Yeah. And anyway, I should be quiet because I can tell you want to get forward. And
No, I'm listening. This is,
yeah,
like I said,
but
it's a detective lounge. We're just we're just talking and letting people in on our conversation. So feel free.
it's all
Just
the
been there.
same stuff. Like
But yeah,
what you're gonna talk about with Seven Pillars. It's the same thing. It's just it's routes and resources, isn't it? And ideology.
Yep. Yeah, that was and the extent of it was the one that surprised me. And then you got me on this because you're like, hey, what how much of Dune is, seven pillars? And I'm like, I don't know. Let me take a look. And then, but that just led to a whole wormhole because I was like, oh, okay.
I've got
I
a
didn't realize
Dune
that
map coming in. I have a Dune map coming in a few days.
Oh, that's gonna be nice.
It just got DHL'd from London, so it's on the way now. Yeah.
Oh, nice. That's gonna be awesome. But yeah, it's very interesting, and it's good because I started using that on the Think Like a Detective course. So we're doing a book club of the Think Like a Detective for the people that support, and then we've been breaking it down. And this is one of the few books I've ever read that actually Lawrence, when he writes it, it's a mea culpa. It's like, okay, he's very honest about his biases, but he's also very honest about these are the problems that I had publishing the book. Right. This is what I went through. I lost this. I burned all my notes. To heck with this. This is where the bias is. There's a one he published for Oxford. He's like, I'm not even going to show anybody. That's going to be locked away. So he's very honest about it. He says, this is a personal view of it. Shouldn't be taken as history. So that's one of the rare books where they actually, from the author's standpoint, he's like, this is very biased, and here's why it's biased. And then his brother took over the publishing of it. His brother was kind of his literary executor, and his brother talks about all of the publishing problems that they had with it, going back and forth. And Lawrence really didn't want to write this book. He was thrust into the spotlight because of an American propagandist that we sent over there, and the penchant for ladies to kind of like that image of him in the chic clothes.
Right.
Apparently that resonated real well. Well, Rudolph, I didn't realize that, but the archetype, but people now probably don't know it, but one of the first modern, for use of a better term, sex symbols was Rudolph Valentino. And he was famous for a silent film in the 1920s called The Sheik. And he was dressed as a sheik, right? So he had the sheik, and he would come in as the great lover, and it was a silent film. And, the women were all, enamored with him. His name, Rudolph Valentino, was one of the first sex symbols of cinema. But he dressed up like a sheik. And then I'm reading this, and I'm looking at it. And when this documentary, film and presentation was made in New York in end of 1918, early 1919, part of that was showing Lawrence in his Arab garb, and the audience was, they were all excited about that. Because other than that, they were showing, the huge Australian contingent, the armored cars, General Allenby and his soldiers going through, because the British had a pretty large presence in the Middle East. And they were showing this, American propagandist was showing this. And then he shows this, obvious white guy dressed up like an Arab, leading all these Arabs on camels, and that just excited people, and it became kind of a sex symbol. But he didn't want that. He was actually just wanting to go back to college and teach. And eventually he went back in the army under a different name. He had an anonymous name because he didn't want publicity. In 1923, the American propagandist wrote a book, and the whole title of Lawrence in Arabia was from his film, because it was General Allenby in Palestine. And then, because this character of Lawrence, which had about 10 to 15 minutes of this large presentation documentary, everybody was talking about that. They sent him to England. They sent the propagandist to England. They re-edited the film, the propaganda film that was being shown in New York, in Madison Square Garden of all places. Went back, and then Dale Carnegie, who wrote How to Win Friends and Influence People, he was on the ship with the propagandist Lowell, and they're recutting the whole thing to emphasize Lawrence. They get to London. It ends up being at the Royal Albert Hall. The royal family sees it. Winston Churchill sees it. All these people see it. Lord Grey saw it. And then suddenly Lawrence is the spotlight, and they change the title with Allenby in Palestine and Lawrence in Arabia. That's the new title. They They put this guy that was basically a very new college graduate who was direct commissioned as lieutenant, moved up to colonel by the war's end, and then just wanted to return to college. They put him in the same billing with the general, right? And so all of a sudden he's in the big thing just because of the way he looks, right? He's very photogenic. He's got that look, and he's dressed up like an Arab in all the video, or all the film. So he gets thrust in the spotlight. He's got to write this book, right? So 1923, another book comes out. They ended up doing it serialized. So each chapter he has to send into the magazine and the newspapers, and every month they publish it. So they're keeping him on schedule. And you can see in here where he rebels against some of the editors, especially the editor in America. They're like, you're using different spellings for this. And he goes, yes, because they pronounce it differently, right? For like place names. It's like, yes, Arabs will pronounce it differently. And he says, you called a camel. What was the one? He says, you called a camel, or, the spelling is different. You called her, Rosalie in one and Rosary in the other. And he goes, yes, and she was a beautiful beast. In other words, he doesn't care. He's doing this under duress. Like, I don't care. Here's your information, whatever. So the honesty that he brings to this book is very good, right, in the beginning. And so for our Think Like a Detective course, we're actually talking about, how do you reduce bias? Both identify your own bias, reduce it when you're doing an investigation, and then the witness, right? And so in this case, we're treating this like a witness. You treat documents and books like witnesses, identifying their bias, and okay, now when they're presenting the information, we understand their perspective, their bias, and reduce it. And he's one of the rare authors that I've seen that right in the beginning, here's my bias, here's my problems, here's all the people that were involved in this book, kind of putting it forward, including Bernard Shaw was kind of the co-author. They pulled him out of college, Lawrence, put him in somebody else's house, and then George Bernard Shaw was there working with him to write this book, right? and he didn't want this. So that was a good part. But then the second few parts, it's really, really interesting about his views of the Middle East. It's his tactical views of the Middle East, his ethnographic views of the Middle East. And it's revealing because, like we were talking before we came live, it really highlights a lot of the foundations of the patterns that have been put in place that are inherent today. We're still dealing with them. One of the interesting parts that he had was talking about in his view, he called them the Arabs. He called Semites, right? So the Arabs, he said, if you're Babylonian language, Phoenician language, Greek language, the Hebrew language, the Arabic language, and he had like Assyrian language. He said those are Semites, and they're from this box, and they all have similar characteristics. And that one of those characteristics was you'll have their only industry is creeds. Their only industry is religious creeds, because they come from urban areas in the periphery, which trade along the Mediterranean and then the Indian Ocean. Then they go into the desert with nothing. And in the emptiness of the desert, you find the fullness of God, and then you create this creed, and then you come back out as a prophet. And he says for thousands of years, they keep doing that. And the three religions, he says, come from that. And he has this kind of this view of the Arabs as this kind of a metaphysical view of the Arabs. But then at the same breath, before that, he'll talk about how brutal they are because of that same emptiness of the desert. So that emptiness of that stripping of a human being of all of the accoutrements of what he called civilization. You're in the desert alone, right, in the very harsh environment, will create both a brutal human being, right, one that is filled with violence, but also an emptiness that then is filled in with what he called the fullness of God. And he said that produces a group in the Arabs that creates two things. Number one, they have only black and white, right? It either is or it isn't. It's absolute or nothing, right? There's nothing in between. And he said that what he called it, the crown of thorns within the West was doubt. Self-doubt is a crown of thorns in the West. So he admired the Arabs for just like, I don't care, I'm doing it, right? They're go-getters, they're going to get this. And he talked about using them because he said in the Middle East, no, he would not bear the guilt, I believe, for inveigling any European power to go and administer the Middle East, right? So you have to subcontract. And he said the Arabs are the ones that can go do it, right? Not the Turks. He hated the Turks. He really didn't like the Turks at all. And so he said the Arabs would be our guy Friday for managing the Middle East, and that was his focus. And so he's doing that with, for example, General MacDonald. But at the same time, the British government, he infers it in the beginning. But the British government promised it to two other groups, right? One is themselves and the French with the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and then the second one with a small slice next to the Suez Canal was the Jews with, Palestine, that they could go there. But then McDonnell and Lawrence, as underneath McDonnell, were promising this big pan-Arab area to that whole region, right, to the Arabs. And in the end of it, it ended up being, of course, the French and the British split the difference. And then after that, about 4 or 5 years, in part due to Lawrence's popularity and his advocating for the Arabs getting at least something, then you have the British said, okay, fine, you're going to have Saudi Arabia, you're going to have a little bit of these Gulf states, and we'll put that in there. So you begin to see how they view managing routes and resources using populations and then kind of moving that around. So it was fascinating to watch that part. And then, like we talked about before, when they were assessing that region, they say both Iraq, what they call it Mesopotamia. So Mesopotamia and Egypt without the river is nothing. And then this is what I wanted to bring up, that document. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. But
Mesopotamia
the document when I was
is the area between the Tigris and the Euphrates.
Yep. In fact, I'll show you the. Let me see if I can bring the other camera up here. There we go. Yeah, because
Mesopotamia, like hippopotamus, the river horse.
Potamias.
That's the area between the rivers.
Yep. There we go. So I'm going to share this real quick. There we go. So one of the things that we got was, and I would recommend this also for your books, to kind of verify what Lawrence was doing, but at a higher level, because Lawrence, like I said, was direct commissioned from college as a lieutenant. And so he's operating at a certain level, but I wanted to know, okay, what are the generals talking about? What are all the other folks talking about? And this one was printed in 1923 by the British government, the Committee for Imperial Defense, the government of India, because the government of India, Britain, was in charge of the Middle East. So these are the main guys. And this is their official history of that area. And it's really good because it goes in, it's got, a ton of maps in there. There's like a whole folder of maps in the back that they go through. And it's weird because as I was looking at these, they were talking about like Shaiba base. And I'm like, Shaiba, that's where the 11th RLC, the Royal Logistics Corps, or the RLC guys were, the ATO guys, and then the EOD guys for Britain. So you're looking at this, there's Kut al-Amara, that's where they were surrounded. But all these areas, Basra, Shaiba, Ramadi, everywhere that Britain was going back in World War I, we were back again basically in the other campaign. So it's like, oh my goodness. But the maps are great, and they go through all of these details about the region. And the interesting part was looking at already before the war, the British had interest in oil. Here we go. So this is one that comes with that book, and it's Lower Mesopotamia because they haven't named it Iraq yet. And the interesting part is you've already got oil fields up in what they call the Maidan oil springs, and this is Persia. So this is Iran, what becomes Iran up here, or Persia, and then this is Iraq, but they call it Lower Mesopotamia. And in 1890s, the British had worked out a deal and kind of recognized Kuwait. So they're setting up a buffer. All this is Ottoman territory. So this is Ottoman Empire. And at the beginning of the war, though, before the war, Britain had set up the oil springs here. They built a pipeline that goes down just south of Basra so that they could then take it on containers and then out, right? So this is basically feeding, and mostly a lot of it went to India, but then some of it would go around and then up through into Britain. But a tremendous oil. And then also in the Shat al-Arab, which is this area here in Abadan Island, they also had the Persian Anglican Oil Company. And they were talking about, okay, how can they staff that with military folks before the war and they believe that would help induce the Arabs. Here we go, the Anglo-Persian Oil Works. This later became BP, or British Petroleum. But this is just south of Basra. So as you're going from Basra down, and then there's the Shat al-Arab, there's the Anglo-Persian Oil World, there's Mohabera, and then there's a big group of Arabs here, and then the Turks were kind of garrisoning this region, sending more people in there. But the British had oil in this region. So what they needed to do for World War I in the Middle East was two things. One is secure this region, so it needs to move out of the ledger of the Ottomans, because the Ottomans control this, and then Persia controls the Persian side. But in order to do that, as long as the Ottomans are here, they can get influence here. So they said, okay, we're going to have to go here. They land in Basra. This is independent from Lawrence. They land in Basra, and then they fight their way up to Baghdad. And then Lawrence noted that most of the armies that they fought on the route to Baghdad were mostly Arab Turks. So they were Arabs in the Turkish army and weren't really in the fight, right? So they were like, meh. And so they got up to Baghdad, they garrisoned Baghdad, and about that time, that's when the Turks were able to kind of amass enough of the Turkish army to come down, the Turkish units, the majority Turkish units, and then they surrounded the British at Kut. And then they were able to kind of reverse some of that, and then the British were static. So till the end of the war, they basically had this region here, and then they pushed up a little into Persia. They had worked out before the war that they're going to give part of Persia, or what's now Iran, northern Iran, to Russia, Tsarist Russia. But after the Bolshevik Revolution, they didn't have to honor that agreement. So they said, okay, it's all going to be ours, right? So Persia is going to be ours. Baghdad, Iraq is going to be ours. And that was that campaign. And Lawrence did have a short visit to Mesopotamia because the command over in the Hejaz area in Egypt sent him into this region saying, maybe you can mobilize the Arabs to help out the British. But when he got there, it wasn't feasible, so he ended up going back. But he was there at the last few days of the siege of Kut, where the British actually had to surrender because they were surrounded by the Ottomans. So I was looking at this to say, okay, the bigger picture, what's going on as Lawrence is beginning his journey in the sand to rally the Arabs, mostly Faisal's group, with that. And one of the things that we were looking at, let me see, was the document that I told you about yesterday. And to let everybody know, so this is the other part of, hey, oh, can you hear me? Uh-oh. We can't hear you.
My mic was muted. Let me ask you, is that out of your Lawrence of Arabia book, those cool maps?
No, that was the British, the official British history from, yeah. Now, Lawrence did have a map.
Okay, what's exactly the name of that book?
Oh, let me go back over here. So I will pull it back up here. So this book is The Campaign in Mesopotamia, 1914 to 1918, Volume 1. It's a 2-volume, and it was published in 1923 by the British government for the Committee for Imperial Defense with the Indian government.
Oh, this sounds really important, actually. I've been to one of the graveyards by Fallujah, by the way, with British and sepoys like Gurkhas and Nigerians in there and stuff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they used a lot of colonial troops because they felt they were more acclimated to the climate, right? So in other words, the climate was a lot better for them. And so there's a part in here. Now, this is the interesting part that feeds into ideology. So we talked about why they need this area for resources, right? And we can kind of guess why they need, and this is Lawrence's map here. I'm going to pull this up. So that Mesopotamia area is, of course, Iraq, and you've got Basra, right? So there's Basra, there's what's Kuwait there, and the Persian area. So they want to grab this, they want to secure Persia for that oil fields. They want to get the oil fields here, and then they want to take this out of the Ottoman Empire so that they own the Strait of Hormuz and the oil that flows through there. But Lawrence, this is his campaign area here, right? So the red is the Suez Canal. Britain in the 1870s and 80s secured Egypt. They got Egypt. They occupied it. It's theirs. And then there was a big battle down here with Khartoum and Colonel Gordon against the Mahdi army. The first Mahdi army was down here in Sudan. And so by the time the war starts, Sudan is British. So they now have the ability. They've got the basically the eastern flank of the Red Sea. So they've got the approaches here. They've got the eastern flank of the Red Sea is theirs. But what they don't have is this, because this on this side is Ottoman, which are now friendly to the Germans, right? It's not in their turf. So that's a threat. And then this is Ottoman up here at the northern end of the Mediterranean, what's now Syria, Lebanon, and Israel. In those days, that's Ottoman Empire. And there's Ottoman Empire right there, that's Turkey. So this approach, the northern approach through and away from the Suez Canal, is in danger, right? So that's a problem. And then the Sinai is almost like a DMZ between them. And then the British handled this, but now they needed this, right? And this is Faisal, right? This is where Lawrence's main area of operations was, right here, to secure this box. But at the same time, the British are securing Basra. They're going up to Baghdad. They're getting the Tigris River, and then they're moving in and securing more influence within Persia, which becomes Iran, and they're negotiating with the Marsh Arabs, these areas here, to get them on their side. And the Arabs aren't a single group; they're multiple different tribes. So some get along, some don't. In fact, there's a good analogy in here where they talk about that Ibn Rashid didn't get along with Ibn Saud, and that's why they weren't going to, no matter if it was British or Turkish, they're not going to work together. I don't care who's in charge. It could be British or Turkish. Ibn Saud and his group is not going to work with Ibn Rashid and his group. Just not going to happen, right? So it's managing all those little internal politics of the Arabs. That was a big deal. So this is Lawrence's map. So what he has to do, and this is the important part. So it's two goals for the British. Number one is you want to secure now your western flank of the approach and exit on the southern side to the Suez Canal, right? And that goes down here, and then there's Yemen down here. So this is a big part of it because there's Mecca, there's Medina, and that's the Arabs. But the other one that came out when I read this book, not the Lawrence book, Lawrence didn't really go too much into it, but these guys were all about it. The generals were very concerned at the government of India. The British colonial government of India was extremely concerned, and they're the ones kind of managing the campaign in the Middle East. What they were concerned about was jihad, right? So that's the interesting part. So jihad was going to occur as soon as Turkey entered the war, which to me was kind of interesting. So what they talked about was Turkey was going to go into war. They knew eventually Turkey might. They were hoping to kind of keep Turkey out of the war, but the trend was going Turkey's going into war. All of the top dogs within Britain were very concerned if Turkey announces a jihad, they're going to have the sheriff of Medina and Mecca, those linear families that have had it for a long time, the Husseins, they're going to have to declare a jihad. So the Arabs, which make up, depending on the area, almost 80% of the Ottoman Empire, they're going to have to declare jihad. And if that happens, as the book is showing, as these letters, and this is before the war, when they included this letter in here, they're very concerned about a jihad. Why? Because the Muslims in Afghanistan and the Muslims in India, because there's no Pakistan. The Muslims in India are all throughout India, right? It's a big part of it, and they're in the British military. So if Turkey was going to go jihad and claim a jihad, and the Arabs would stay on the Turkish side because they're subjects of Turkey, then they've got a big problem. Then India, the back door, the main source of a lot of the manpower of the English Empire was Indian, right? Both for labor and soldiers. And the Muslim fighters were big. And they were like, we have to look over our back now. We can't be fighting everywhere in Verdun and the Marne and in Western Europe and in the Middle East. It's going to be impossible. And they're already starting to get some raids from Afghanistan. And so they needed to separate. And they're very clear within their letters. They have to separate the Arabs from the Turks. They cannot allow those two to get along in a pan-Islamic group. They got to separate them. And then that was what Lawrence was doing, was getting in there, identifying the leaders that were pro-British and using them to say, okay, now let's go kinetic. Let's openly fight against the Turks, the Ottoman Empire, so that now you can divide them. And then if the Arabs aren't going to join your side, that's fine, but they need to stay neutral and not support the Turks, and definitely not call for a jihad, a larger jihad. So that was a huge issue on that, right? And then we won't talk about it too much now, but in the other part, that fits in a little bit to your Dune reference, right? In other words, that's one of the themes, that jihad from the Mujahideen is one of the themes within Dune that Frank Herbert wrote. So that answered that question a little bit. But they're very concerned about the jihad, very concerned about the jihad. And then they go into that at length in here.
That's a 4-volume set, right? Not 2.
4 volume. Yeah, I've only got 2. I've still got to hunt down those other 2. So, because I got these local. Luckily, I was very lucky to get these local. So I've got to hunt down the other 2. I might have to go online and grab those from that. But like I said, they were big on. There are many divisions within the Arab all of the Arabs in all the different areas. So they had to work on that. So that's what Lawrence's main focus was. To secure the routes and the resources, you've got to use ideology to mobilize certain groups. And in some cases, use ideology to mobilize those groups either to try to cooperate or to be against each other so that you can maintain control of those resources. So that was very important. And that's what Lawrence's job was. And he mentioned that he's very open about that, is that was his job, was to get, to identify who's the mover and the shaker in that region for the Hijaz, for mobilizing those that would openly go against the Turks and prevent a jihad. And so that was the big thing that he was working on in his zone, his area of operation. But he's not, like I said, he's not the only one. There's a huge campaign going on, tens of thousands of casualties. They were operating in Basra. You saw the graveyard, right? Going up from Basra on up to Baghdad. That whole area was a battlefield. And then also we can't forget Gallipoli, right, up in the Dardanelles. So the Constantinople, right, or Istanbul, that crossing, right, to go basically from Turkey into what's now kind of, Greek territory, and that area, the Hellenic area, the old Hellenic area, that Dardanelles crossing that goes up into the Black Sea. Remember, Churchill had that campaign. So there's really three operational areas within the larger Middle East that the British are really focused on, and those are the resources. And it's very, very specific for some areas because that's feeding India. If you lose the Suez Canal, you've lost that quick trade to India. That's very important that they got. Very important. And with oil now, because they've become dependent on oil starting about the 1890s, the Britons shifted to that oil. And that's a pillar. That's one of the three pillars of their entire empire is oil. The other one is banking, right? So if they lose that oil pillar, they're done. And they needed that facility of trade to India. So the jihad threatened to cut that, and they needed to be able to chop that up and secure it. And the ideology in this case was Islam, and they needed to have Islam on their side. So they used the Arabs, which was the final say-so in Islam, because they guarded Mecca and Medina generationally, and they got at least those families on their side, even though it was only 3 to 6% of the entire or the Arabic population that was actively kinetically going against the Turks. It was the right 3 to 6%, right? Because it was the group, Faisal and those guys, that was literally the ones that had been guarding Mecca and Medina for generations, and that were seen as the legitimate imams in the area that could call a fahad. They were legitimate for calling a jihad. So that's important to see that pattern. But again, those areas, when they're talking about all of this combat, it's literally the same areas being fought over today, the same reasons it's kind of fought over today, and securing those lanes was very, very, very important. So that's one thing that I was really interested in. And then, if I can try to pull this up, there's the documents that we were talking about earlier. So in that, I said, okay, let me get the Middle East Commission's documents, because that's the planning committee that took the military and the civilian, worked it together and said, okay, what military operations are we going to do to further civilian goals, economic goals, and military goals? That was kind of their joint chiefs, if you will, but merging everything together. And let me see if I can pull it up here. Just one second. Here we go. Yep, I can pull it up. So I'm going to share the screen here real fast. And this is the document I was mentioning to you about. There we go. And this blew my mind for a number of reasons. So it's like we were talking about before we went on live. There is a dearth of information of documents from the British side. They kept things classified. They said initially for 100 years from World War I, but it's been longer than that. And there's a tremendous amount of things that are still classified. But if you're doing investigations, what I would tell everyone is very important to go to sometimes the colonies, right? So if you're looking for something from the British, sometimes you can go to the colonies and they'll have it, right? Because the colonial administration, especially India, the records were kept there, physically kept there. And then during the colonial transition, when those colonies were independent or semi-independent, the records weren't destroyed; they stayed there in some cases, right? So then they become the property or the tradition, the history of that nation. So in this case, this is an original document. This is important why you scan the front and back, in this one, I don't know if you guys can see the resolution. You can see where the typeface actually bleeds through in the back, and you've got some watermarking that actually bleeds through in the back. So, when you do your scans, do the front and the back so that you can see information at that level. So if you're dealing with a copy or you're dealing with an original. In this case, this is an original that went through, and then they had a photographic copy of it at the Qatar. So the Qatar National Library. And they have this document. Apparently, is supposedly Lord Curzon's copy because it's at the top. So one of the things that we do, just like in books, we're looking at source documents. This is just a quick tradecraft for everybody out there that does the research. All source documents aren't the same, right? So in other words, sometimes people will put things in a record, like Congress. They'll put things in a record, even the CIA or FBI. Put things in their record that aren't theirs. They don't generate it, right? But they just put it in there to kind of monitor it, if that makes sense. So they're not endorsing it. They didn't write that. They're just saying, okay, this was a crazy person, or this was a person monitoring, and then they put it in the file. But it is generated by them, so it doesn't have authority from that or accuracy that would be from the FBI, from this guy in Topeka, Kansas, that wrote a letter to the FBI claiming this and sent a book. And they go, okay, fine, and they file it. Right, so yes, it's in the FBI archives, but it was generated by the FBI. So when you're evaluating documents, and again, we talk about the Think Like a Detective course, there's a series of kind of a triage that you do, just like you do with a witness, to gauge the accuracy and the authority of a document, of a source document. So in this case, number one, it's an original, right? This is an original one. It's stamped Lord Curzon, so this is Lord Curzon's copy of a document, and that is okay. So we know that it's an original, so less chance of it being changed or manipulated over time, or data being lost, especially scanned data is getting lost in different ways in that one. But here we also see that the people involved in this are the decision makers, right? So this is the Middle East Committee at Whitehall talking about the future of the Middle East, and they're the ones that will get this implemented. They're the ones that essentially tell the prime minister, this is kind of what you're going to do, sir, and then he gets it done. Right? They're the ones that pretty much, they kind of pay Parliament, but they don't really have to follow Parliament too much. These were the guys with Lord Curzon, and the Balfour is in here. So all of the kind of people that were able to implement the Middle East policy during the war and after the war, that's here. This is their minutes. This is them talking. The other thing is it's secret, right? At the time it was secret. So it's not for public consumption. So you'll see that they're a little more honest. The pronouncements that came from the Middle East Commission and from the British government during the war that were public were in some cases 180 degrees different than what this document says. So this is what they're working with. And then there's what they tell everybody else, right? So that's important. The two things I really wanted to show in this one, the first one was really, I had to read it a couple times. It really, I was on the floor. I'm like, oh man. And I knew I had to tell you, I'm like, Mike's got this one. And it was the meeting minutes on, I believe it was February 1918. So the war is not even over yet. In February 1918. Keep in mind what was going on there, but I'll go ahead.
Your audio is staticky. I wonder if anybody else is getting that.
Uh-oh. Let me double check here. Can you hear now?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
How about now? Maybe I'll do this. Is this better?
Much better. Much better. Yep.
Oh, okay. So going real quick to this one, what this says, and I'm not sure you can see it, but basically they're talking about, they begin to say that there's a proposal which is
it's getting staticky again. I wonder if it's your microphone or something. At first I thought it was just my side. I should have told you a couple of minutes ago. Yeah.
Uh-oh.
That's why I was messing with my side to see if it was from me, but it's from you, I think.
Shoot, I don't know what to do. I break. Remember, I used to break things for a living, so it's like doing the technical side. I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm a good detective.
When you've got your hand on it, it's working. So it's maybe it's a loose connection or something.
Oh.
Yeah, it could be.
Feel the aura.
I wonder if it's a loose connection or something. Because right now it's fine. It's fine right now.
Okay. So I won't touch anything here. I'll leave it be. Hopefully it'll be there. Okay. But on this page, so we see from February of 1918, the committee, which is Lord Curzon, Balfour, all the big dogs, they're talking about it, and they say that endorsed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, very, very highly endorsed, they want to set up in Baghdad. Remember, it's still Ottoman territory. They're just occupying it. They want to set up a bank, a British monopoly bank, and they want to set up a monopoly of on the Tigris River navigation company from Britain that's a monopoly on that. And then they go back and forth, well, is this a good idea? Is this not? It's a good idea. We want to do it, but how are we going to do it? And the reason that they have to do this, and this is February of 1918, the reason that they have to do this is to prevent and it's right there, right? The Japanese from coming in and setting up a bank and a navigation company. I'm like, the Japanese.
Isn't that wild?
I mean,
like, where'd that come from out of the blue?
And if you, that's what I'm saying. If you think 1918, so 1937, well, okay, maybe, but you still got to cross India, right? You get to go across India. So 1918, February 1918, Japan and Britain have an alliance. In fact, the first external entanglement that Britain ever had was with Japan, right? Because they weren't going to sign treaties with anybody. They signed a treaty with Japan, right? So they're going to defend each other, right? That was the first treaty that Britain did, was with Japan. Foreign treaty was with Japan. So Japan is an ally with Britain. Japan is at this very moment, they have destroyers in the Mediterranean guarding British ships moving back and forth, right? In fact, one of them struck a mine and some Japanese died guarding British ships. And yet the British are using the threat that Japan might set up a bank in Baghdad and a river trading company, a river navigation company, to move goods and services up and down the Tigris River from Basra to Baghdad. And that's what the British are worried about in February of 1918. An ally setting up a parallel system of banking and routes and resources. And Japan was barely in China. Japan didn't have Manchuria at this time, right? It was just now the Republic of China. Yuan Shikai was in there. Japan was very supportive of Yuan Shikai. Japan had as much turf in China as America did, as Britain had more, right? In France, all the 9 nations were still in China except for Germany, because Japan had gotten Germany's territory, but that's it. So where in the heck did that come from? that they're worried about Japan in Iraq in 1918. And then they go back and forth and they say, well, we shouldn't be too overt about it because Parliament may ask questions. It will make us look bad because it's like the war was for capitalism, their words. And it may look contradictory to what our Prime Minister and the American President Wilson said. So, we have to be a little cautious about it, about how we go about it. And maybe we do it a different way, but the end result should be we control the trade and the banking in this region. And there's their minutes. They're not worried. It's secret. They're not worried about it. But it just blew me away. I mean, I can kind of get, they would say maybe Germany. Okay, they say Germany. Okay. But Japan? So I've got to go back and dig more in their records of when did Japan suddenly become the enemy, even as they are their friend in defending British lives in the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. It just blew me away. It was just so interesting. But that's one part. The other part, and we may lose the audio here, but I got to move this thing. The part which is absolutely fascinating.
That's one of those things, though, when you find a little sentence like that, there's an iceberg there.
I can't wait. And you started me on this whole iceberg because you were like, hey, figure out how this book ties into Dune. And I'm like, oh, here we go. Here we go. just like old days. Okay. But it's fun. I love it. So we're looking through this thing, and there's a bunch of information here about the Zionist Committee. And I'll send this document to you, and then you can post it on your site. I'll post it on my site. And we actually use this for evaluating a document, going through the 7 triages of evaluating a document to gauge authenticity and accuracy. But the British talk 2 things in here. Number one, they talk about the Zionist Committee. They've got to maintain control of it. And because Chaim Weizmann he's all over the place, and they got to assign him a political officer. So they're debating, or they're discussing which political officer they're going to move over to be with and run the Zionist Committee, right? Well, Chaim Weizmann's the front guy. The British officer is going to be the guy kind of managing it. But number 2, the interesting part, they actually have a separate paragraph that says propaganda, where they said it's not working. We have to focus the propaganda, and they used that word. It wasn't a pejorative back then. We have to focus the propaganda on Americans, or Irish Americans, Anglicans, and Jews, because it's not working. We have to sell the Zionism to those 3 groups. I'm like, what? It's very specific, and I could understand the Jews. Jews weren't very big into Zionism in those days, but the Irish Americans, why do you have to sell it to them? And then why specifically the Anglicans? Because that's the Church of England, right? Because the king is the Pope of the Anglican world. But it was very specific, and they were very focused on that. We need to really refocus the propaganda, and then pull some newspaper guy from somewhere, a reporter, a journalist, to assign him to this desk so he can kind of push this out there. And then you mentioned a movie, and what was it? Was the name of that movie, and it was fascinating, in 1942, that may tie into this.
Catherine Hepburn and Tracy Spencer Tracy, right? And Keeper of the Flames. It's 1942, and somebody left it as a comment on my Substack, and for some reason, usually there's a lot of links and I can't really check them all, but that one I was like, you know what? There's something. It was just a tiny introductory sentence from the kind person who it's one of my paid subscribers. I won't say name I don't know if it's okay, but I watched the movie and then I started watching it again, and it's hard to get me to watch a movie, much less twice. But that movie is really worth watching. Basically it's a movie about a war correspondent comes back from the European War, and some guy named Forrest just got killed in a car accident, and he was about to run for president, and he was super popular, had a personality cult. He was a war hero from World War I, which is the war you're talking about now, and then it turned out he had gone from war hero to despot. Behind the scenes, he was a cult leader, and the power had gone to his head, according to his wife, and he wanted to rule. He wanted to take over and make the United States fascist, straight up. I mean, that's the words they're using, right? And they go through and his secret after he's dead. Now he's had the car accident. He ran off a bridge, and sounds familiar. And the secret files are going through at the end of the movie. It talks about making people anti-Semitic and blacks and whites fighting each other, and Irish, getting all these different groups to fight each other so that they can then rule over them. It's 1942, very nice black and white, and high quality, and worth watching. Yeah. Your voice is out. Your microphone's off.
Test 1, 2.
You got it.
Okay, there we go. Yay! I keep breaking things. So, yeah, that sounds interesting. And again, people don't really realize that there's a huge dichotomy, between it. So this was an ideology kind of created to mobilize a people to guard a section of the resource, and then it was interesting because I said it was promised to two different groups, three different people, but two main groups. There was the Balfour Declaration, which everybody's familiar with, which says that the Jews will have a homeland or a safe area homeland in Palestine, right, to guard that western flank of the Suez Canal. But at the same time, there's the Madonna pronouncement that said, okay, we're going to give all this to the Arabs, right? So there was that. But the British dealt with that one because they fired McDonald. They're like, okay, toward the end of the war, they're like, okay, the Arabs are like, okay, let's do this because you said you were going to do it. And the British are like, well, we don't do that. We sign things. And he's fired. I don't know what he was talking about. But when you read in the 7 Pillars of Wisdom with Lawrence, he goes into, and it's very fascinating, when he looks at he talks about the characteristics of, he calls them the Semites, but he's talking about Arabs. And he goes into it and he says that, again, these are the ones that should be subcontracted to run this whole area. So the British were already looking at, he was very cognizant of, that they're looking to basically use a different group, not the Turks. They're going to take it away from the Turks, but who's going to manage it? And it's not going to be convenient or it's not going to be fruitful if the Europeans come in, right? The British using whatever European group goes in there, because he said he wouldn't wish that on any of his enemies, even, right? He wouldn't inveigle anybody. He doesn't want the guilt of doing that because it's crazy. He says, use the Arabs. They have the energy. He says they have the energy. They have the kind of the cleverness. They have the ability to do this. And according to him, he says that they will follow instructions very well, right? So he has this kind of this romanticized view of the Arabs, but he is literally looking at them post-war as a means to be able to manage the empire, and that's why he was promoting that his view of that pan-Arab area, which was aligned with Britain. And in fact, I've got his map that he presented the Middle East Council.
So to be clear, they're looking at the Arabs as middle management, right?
Yep.
Yeah, because
exactly.
they're well good enough to do serious things, but they will take instruction and ultimately be subordinate to an extent.
And he says,
unless you mess with Islam, in which case they'll come and kill you.
Yeah, the ideology, the jihad, right?
Right.
So this is the map that Lawrence made and gave to the Middle East Commission. So that's how I found those documents, because he had this map and he turned it in there. So I wanted to see the rest of it, right? So I'm like, okay, what's the story behind the map and all that?
That's a beautiful map. Where'd you get this map?
That's from the Middle East Commission. That's that long series of documents. This was attached because he gave it to the Middle East Commission with his report about what he thought the post-war Middle East should look like. And you'll see it's Arabs. There's a little blue in there that's French, but the rest of that, he says Arabs, Arabs, Arabs. But then the Russian territory that was going to be Russia, because the Bolshevik Revolution had negated their claims or their agreement with Britain to get those areas, that was going to be more Russia. He has question marks. So, okay, who's going to manage that area? But that's all going to be managed. And you'll see even there over in Iraq and Iran, it says Arabs under British alignment, under British. So these are tribes, these are families that are aligned to the British. You're going to get these zones, according to, this is Lawrence's view of it, but your allegiance is to Britain. You're going to manage this for us. And he talks about that in his book, that's what it's going to do, because the Europeans don't do well managing the Middle East directly. We'll subcontract it.
Look at the Armenians, man. Look at the Armenians there.
Yeah. Yeah, he was looking at, that's the Armenians. They're going to work that. Anybody that wasn't Turk. So the British were very much against the Turk. They'll shift alliances for British interests. So basically removing the Turk from management of this area so that the British are now managing those resources in there. Was pretty much what he was doing. So it was fascinating. Yeah, so he goes
the yellow
into that.
Arabs, I can't read that quite well. The yellow part for the Arabs, Faisal's with the green part Arabs, but the yellow part of the Arabs up there between Armenians and Iraq, what does that say in the small writing?
I think that's Zaid's. Let me go back and look at that real quick. I'm going to pull it up just by itself.
It's too small on the screen.
Yep.
So I'm better, high quality screen.
Oh, well,
it says under British influence. Zaid.
Yep, it's Zaid. It's under British influence. So each of these are given to the allies of the British, right? So Iraq would be Abdullah, and that's under direct British administration, is Iraq. And then the Zaid is up there in the northern area, which is now part of kind of Turkey up there. There's Colonel Wilson's line. Armenians and the French are going to get that eastern area of Turkey. The French get essentially Lebanon. Palestine is direct controlled by the British, and the Sinai is direct controlled by the British. And kind of that northern area, which is Saudi Arabia and parts of Syria, is going to be the Faisal, and that's who he worked with direct. So Faisal gets kind of the lion's share of everything within this. And then he has that line which says, "No foreign power other than Great Britain be allowed any voice in the government of the country south of this line," right? Which ended up being the half of Saudi Arabia and Yemen. Right. In other words, this is all British.
You're breaking
territory.
up a little bit again. You're breaking up a little bit again. Yeah.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Better.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Yep, it's better. That's better.
Okay. So I have to hold it up here. But yeah, so in other words, that line right there says no other country but Great Britain will have a voice in any say of the country south of this line. Right? In other words, not France. And they're really focused on France. France is not going to have a say in this thing. And then Italy was wanting to come in and do some things too. And that was a big issue because France had a longstanding agreement with the Ottomans to guard the religious churches in what had been Lebanon, Jerusalem, what's now Israel. France was guarding those with an agreement from Turkey. They were guarding the Christian sites. And they wanted to come in and do it again now that the British are going to own the areas, and the British are like, no, maybe not, right? So they're worried about the French kind of coming in after the war. And even in World War II, there's some notes between the General Staff of Britain, even Churchill, and the American Chief of Staff about, we were upset with Britain because they kept wanting to do these little side campaigns in the Mediterranean. We're like, well, that's not knocking out Germany. And Britain's like, well, no, but we're making sure the French are going to stay in the box, right? It was like, after the war. So they're still thinking of those routes and resources. But the American generals at that time were like, we're going to Berlin. What was the sideshow? And the Brits are like, well, no. The sideshow is the point, right? Like World War I, this sideshow is the point because it's grabbing those resources and the routes and securing them for future generations. And we're still fighting. We're still adjusting the lines over those same areas. It's quite interesting. So
can I say something in this regard? This is so important because we're hyper focused on this, and it's super, super interesting and very important to understand. And it's a tiny subset of the truer great game. You still got all of Asia and Europe going on, and Africa and the Pacific, and so this is super sophisticated. This area, and it's just a tiny part of a large multi-dimensional chessboard.
Yep, and one of the clues is, why are they worried about the Japanese in 1918 coming into Baghdad and setting up a bank and a trading company up and down the Tigris River?
We got to trace that down. Actually, I took notes here because that's an outlier I was unaware of, and I sense it's important. Actually, that little sentence.
Yep. And that's the shift, because by 1923 they had renounced their agreement with Japan, their mutual defense agreement with Japan, in for the Washington Treaty. They said, okay, now it's going to be kind of a bigger group. So were they already kind of ready for their exit plan because Japan had ceased to be useful for them anymore? I don't know, but I'm very curious about that. And then specifically why they thought Japan would be in Iraq in 1918. That's just fascinating. But again, it shows that these levels of detail that go on as kind of undercurrent, that the wars are many times about getting those routes, resources, and ideology, as you say again and again. But getting into those source docs, looking at, this, but you got to dig. You can't just take one source of it. You got to go further, get the source documents, look at the official records, look at, what's been in behind the scenes, so to speak, to try to put all that together. And then you get a clearer picture. But even then, it's not the full picture, like you said, because there was, at the same time, there's this big global game going on. And it includes the Arctic, right? The Arctic trade routes. We're talking the lee of the moon. Now we're beyond that. And this was for oil. This was the three pillars of the British Empire, oil being one of them, banking being the other. But now we're talking information. We're talking data centers, AI, the technology, information routes, right? Who owns these data centers? So I think a lot of this is transitional, but it's the same thing. It's just a new shiny toy that's added. Like oil was added in 1890 as critical for British Empire. Now the U.S. is saying, okay, AI is important. This is critical for, our oligarchical empire. So all of this, it's the same thing, just different toys, but the same lines, the same routes, the same patterns tend to emerge over and over again. So there we go. So I thought you'd appreciate that document, but I'll shoot it over to you. It blew me away, and there's a lot more in there. Like I said, the Zionist Committee, and it goes about 2 months. It goes from January. Each week they met, and it's the meeting minutes of every week. So you'll see kind of how it progresses. Did they find a good political officer that could work and, control the Zionist Committee? The reporter, was he able to come over? That kind of thing. So you get to follow it and see what were the political considerations. But India was a big part of it. They needed to maintain India. And then if you ever get that book about the Mesopotamian campaign, in the beginning of the war, they're terrified about jihad in India. If they lose India, they're in trouble, they said. So that was a big deal for them, and why a focus on the Arabs was absolutely critical.
Have you ever noticed, whenever you and me, we've been doing this for years now, whenever we start following a train track, sometimes literally, like out in that jungle you had me on in Craw Isthmus 12 years ago, and
long time.
Every time we start on some line of research, which always are fascinated in and of themselves, we end up going, hey, there's a buried cable here. It looks like a telegraph. Let's follow. Is it live? Still got energy going through it. Like that little sentence you just found on Japan and Iraq. I just have some feeling that's a telegraph cable to something hidden that we need to know about to understand that something that's going on right now. I just get that sneaky feeling. I know you know what I mean very well.
Oh yeah, it's that one thread that you see on the sweater and you start pulling at it. Like, wait, what's this?
Exactly.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Well, like when you said, you had that passing comment. You said, "Hey, what about Seven Pillars of Wisdom? How much is it like Dune?" And I'm like, "All right, I'm on it." So I looked at
Yeah.
it, and then I'm like, "Holy
Yeah.
crap!" So
Yeah.
it's turned out pretty good. So thank you for that. I appreciate the
Oh,
the reference. It's been a fun dig. It's
no,
digging up a lot here.
it's going to be important for other stuff we study as time unfolds.
Yep,
Yeah.
definitely. Alrighty. Well,
All right,
what's
sir.
now? Before we go off, I'd like you to go ahead with what's going on with Conchito House. How's the baby? How's Baby Bear? How's things going there in House of Yon and the Conchito House?
Oh, tomorrow's week 36. Masako baby's kicking up a storm. Yeah.
Oh wow.
And
What month do they think it's due? What's the
well, less than a month now. So yeah, yeah,
cool?
yeah.
Oh my
T
goodness.
minus. Oh man, we're psyched. Yeah, we're just unbelievably excited.
Uh,
The Yeah, so we're just prepared. Misako has been sewing diapers and stuff, and it's interesting because just a few days ago she's sewing 80 diapers. She's downstairs sewing right now, but
wow.
I've been down there. I'll just talk with her for hours while she's. I know she wants me to leave her alone 'cause she has to concentrate, but 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 so this newborn, one lady had a newborn recently, and well, it was newborn when she had it, and a few months ago. But now City Hall is trying to make her take jabs, make the baby take jabs. So they
Hmm.
reached out to Misako. The mother's under stress because the mother is, she doesn't want to give her baby these death jabs. She knows how dangerous they are, and she's like, but they're bothering her and threatening her. And in Japan, you can't
Hmm.
force them to take the jab, but they use every form of social pressure, right? And as you know, so they end up calling Misako, and I'm sitting there with Misako, and a phone call comes in. She's sewing diapers. And Misako, while sewing diapers for our new baby coming, she's hearing about some other mother get threatened with the Jap. Misako calls up this powerful politician immediately. She's like,
Hmm.
"Hold on, I'll be back to you." Calls up, and they're talking in Japanese. And so this is just a few days ago, and then that before the day was finished, somebody already went to the city hall and was like, "Hey, you don't talk to the mother anymore. You talk to me." Right?
Nice.
So yeah, I mean that's what we have to do is we have to
Hmm.
get our because all of us have little abilities to do things in our own part of the world. And if we have inventory of our friends and ourselves and what we're able to do and what they're able to do, we can be more powerful as a group, much more powerful, right? And so now that little baby will never know that while another woman was sewing diapers, she calls up a politician and says, "Hey, back off." You know what I mean? This is going to be in the news with your name, and but the thing is that's a small solution. We have to do
Hmm.
it on a larger solution. In other words, so that it's not just helping one mother. That's not useful. It is useful for that mother and baby, but we need to make it. We need to get everybody doing this so that we all fight back and change the entire mechanism of how this works. Get out of our life is what we need. We need to we need to really push back hard, like leave us alone, like don't call me again. When City Hall kept calling Misako, the last time they called, I said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, who are they calling?" Start interviewing them. Misako starts calling them up and starts going, "What software are you using? I want to see a copy of the contract. What are the disclosure terms?" And that made them, they're all of a sudden like, "Wait a minute, wait a minute." We were pulling the tail of a tiger because Misako starts going, "You're not interviewing me. I'm interviewing you." You know what I mean? It's a totally
Nice.
different world. Don't be the victim. You know what I mean? When they're starting to come after you, don't be like, "Oh, don't hit me again." By, "Oh no, man, I eat hands." And when other mothers do this and fathers do this, and everybody stands up, they're going to want to stop calling people because it'll stress them out, right? They don't want to see their names in the newspapers. They don't want to see everybody in their office get named for doing this, for going to people's houses and forcing babies to eat this syrup that comes from people that just murdered huge numbers of Japanese and Americans, right? I mean, this is a big deal. Japanese are more and more are waking up to this, and Americans too. It's very important. Everybody needs to know, develop your networks and use them all the time, because the more you use them all the time, the stronger that they will get. and then they become, it's like developing a neural network. It's developing our nervous system, not to be nervous, but to get things done,
Yep.
electrify our nervous system, right? And so that's a neural network. So you said Conjuro House, so that's part of it, is being able to connect people to the right people, right? She's got another one here that called her up about her daughter wants to go to America or Europe someplace to do exchange student, and they want to force her to take the jab. Uh-oh, did we cut off?
No, no, I'm here. I'm
And
just so people can see you, right?
yeah, so the question is, uh, how are you going to go over to this other country without taking the jab? Because the bottom line, I got a message from a doctor in Texas last week or week before, and one of his family members in the military was just forced. He didn't have to take the jab, but he was coerced into taking the jab, and he just did. He took a COVID jab like 2 weeks ago. A young military officer took the jab, and it's like, here's what you do: no, 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 no. You're going to court martial me. That's what you're going to do. Okay, you're going to court martial me. I'm not taking the jab. I'm not taking the jab. Court martial me. That's just the way it's going to be. Dishonorable discharge. Bye. Right. I'm not taking the jab. Period. And if enough people man up and woman up, then that'll be that. Right. But you got to fight your corner. You're in combat. Nobody's going to come rescue you. You're a small special forces team. You're in the building alone. Ain't nobody coming. So, you either fight or you die, and you may die anyway. But do not surrender. Do not surrender. Don't take the jab. Just don't do it. Find a way through it. Fight your way through it. Don't take it, period. No matter what.
Yep.
Did
It's
I
like the
say
old
that
saying, the good
clearly
news
enough?
is,
Yeah.
good news is it's up to you. Bad news is it's up to you.
That's right. You are 9/11. That's it.
Yep.
You're 911.
Yep, that's true. Well, that sounds like some good stuff going out there with you and Misako, and that's excellent. Setting up that organizational structure that then kind of runs itself, above and beyond personalities. That's fantastic. So looking forward to that.
Because the goal is we set it up, and our days on Earth are obviously everybody's days on Earth are limited. We have to develop things that outlast us, right? And so that when it's all said and done, this thing is going to do something bigger, because the things that we're fighting against were developed over long periods of time, and we have to develop things that are robust and long term, which means not us. We are just part of it, and then we're going to be gone, and then the next ones will carry on. When you look at it like that, everything's much smoother, much easier, and you'll be much happier because you got a mission in life that's very important. If you have a mission that's more important than you in life, you will have fulfillment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow, that's fantastic. Well, thank you very much for coming in there. And then we're gonna cut it here to an hour and 30 minutes because my editor gets all nuts when it goes over that. I give her 3 hours of video. And she's like, "What are you doing to me?" But congratulations, and let me know. Oh, one final question. I'm doing the Columbo thing. One more thing. Do we know the gender of the baby bear yet? Is it baby bearette? Is it baby bear?
We don't know the gender because we don't want to get the ultrasound to find out. I would like to know. Misako would like to know. We're not keeping it a surprise for ourselves. We just not going to take the chance. On baby name, if it's a boy, we're going to name Kenjiro. If it's a girl, in Japan, when in the old days, when a girl was born, they would plant a kiri tree, right? We call it, what do we call it in America? Paulownia tree or something, Paulownia. But they call it kiri, Kiri. And we were in the library a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about that. And I said, what kind of tree do they plant for children in Japan? And Misako didn't actually know. I said, in Japan, if she knew that they planted tree, I said, it's going to be a specific type, because you know how Japanese are. These are sophisticated thinkers. You know what I mean? It's not going to be like, just plant any random tree. It's going to have a long story that goes with it, and it's going to be an important story. And there is. It turns out there is. The kitty tree. Oh, your editor is going to go crazy, but
That's
anyway,
all right.
if you look at the kid, okay. One final thing. This kitty tree, just look it up. It's amazing.
Okay.
They use it both as a fire break and as firewood. They use it. It's
Oh,
unbelievable.
oh wow.
It's a typical Japanese super duper thing. You know what I mean? Yeah,
Kiri. I'm gonna have to look that up. Kiri. I'll take a
yeah.
look.
It's
Well, thank
amazing.
you, thank you very much for coming on. And then for everybody out there, keep watch about what's going on. And for example, in the Asia thing, the full thing, we've been talking back and forth. I didn't get to it this time, but Jeju Island in Jeju-do in southern Korea. There's an island there. There's actually a special forces base on Jeju-do. But there's a series of murders that occurred, missing persons that are now turning into murders, and the police covered it up. And there's rumors of a lot of CCP involvement and things like they're being given preferential treatment for buying land down there at the expense of the Koreans and that sort of thing. So keep an eye on that one because that might actually kind of blow up a little bit as far as the dynamics within South Korea. So it's kind of interesting to watch. So
I
one
went
thing we
there
didn't
like
get to,
10 years ago looking into missing people, but it was missing people from World War II, which turned
well,
out
remember
to
they
be
had
a
that
huge
big
lie.
expedition. They had all the American. They said the Americans massacred with the South Koreans massacred that huge group. They took Andrew Salmon out there, right, and they showed him the kind of the statues or things like that. They set up a memorial for those folks that they said the Americans and South Koreans massacred the Jeju-do folks out there. But
I went there
now the
too. In fact,
Jeju-do residents.
I'm gonna call Andrew
Yeah.
when we hang up. Actually,
Yeah, that'd be good. See what goes on that. All right. Well, you have a safe day, and then we'll look forward to getting the great news that you're going to be a father here shortly. It's going to be awesome, and hopefully we'll get over there and see you soon.
all right. We'll see you soon.
All right.
Bye, Al.
Thanks very much for
Thanks.
coming out. All right. Bye. Excellent. So we've got. As soon as we get on that, there we go. So, real quick, I'll go ahead and wrap it up. The book that we've been talking about was written by T.E. Lawrence. It's the 7 Pillars of Wisdom, and from that, then we look at other source documents. We look at other sources from it. If you're interested in more of it, it's a book club that we've got going here on Substack where we kind of break it down into a series of chapters and we really kind of dissect it. What is he talking about? Look at the people around there, the social network, the history, and then we delve into these other documents, these other sources. So this was kind of a sneak peek about kind of what we do when we discuss the book club from a historical investigator's point of view, right? So you treat a book like a witness, right? We're gonna see if it's valid what they say. We look at their biases. We see mitigating factors, all that sort of thing. But it does turn out, as you see, a lot of interesting things that help explain what goes on today. And that's really the point of history, is to give you a good model for understanding the world now and making decisions going forward based upon accurate views of history, right? So you're not basing your decisions going forward on fantasy, but more on facts. So that's what we're talking about. So thank you very much again for Michael Yon for coming out. Great stuff. Go over to his Substack. He's got a really good Substack. Puts out a lot of his information. He's also got an X account with some stuff, but his substantive stuff comes out mostly on Substack. But really good because he's got that great working model of history, and he's kind of subsumed a lot of his bias and reduces the ego to go, okay, this is what it is, and I'm going to follow the facts now, and this is what the fact pattern suggests. So good, definitely a good person to watch. Tomorrow I've got a invitation, thanks to Mike, for I'll be on a show with Mark Christensen, so that'll be interesting, and we'll be talking history and that sort of thing. So if you're clicked in with him, we'll put it in the link also when this gets posted, so you can go over there, and then we'll be talking history. And so that's the first time I'll be a guest with somebody else talking this stuff. So have a good day. If you have any questions on this, go ahead and put it in the comments below. If you're interested more and think like a detective in the Detective Book Club, feel free to look there. That's behind the paywall on Substack. Just because if it's too many people, it gets confusing, and I want to be able to answer everybody's questions and kind of dig down in there, show them the sources, work with them, develop their techniques so that they can go out and do this kind of thing on that. So have a great weekend. Thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in. We really do appreciate it. Being able to give me some break time from my private investigation work to kind of do this. It's fun. I enjoy it. I love history, and being able to apply my day job to the history side is something good. And then sharing it with everybody is fantastic. If you have a subject that you'd like us to look at, let me know, and we'll try to get to it. No promises, because like I said, I've got a day job, I've got to work, and a lot of fires I got to go put out and investigate. But we would like to get to it because everything has meaning. Everything kind of ties in at some level to something else, and it illuminates something about not just the local history, but the patterns of history and humans and who we are and how we interact with the world around us. So thank you very much, and you guys have a great day. We'll see you.